And number three, so here we are looking at the big debates on Capitol Hill. One of those is the argument over ignoring the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. The DOJ, FBI, and frankly anyone else covered by the law enforcement umbrella investigating Americans without a warrant and doing whatever they want in the name of national security. And those up front are not even pretending to care anymore about Americans having protected rights like privacy. They simply don't care. And they use all the regular buzzwords about national security and safety of our citizens and so on and so forth. They're clearly based on the wide open southern border really is not much of interest to those in Washington. And in fairness, has never been in my lifetime. That's the way it is. It is the way it is. The White House arguing that the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution really not a good idea anymore. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan doesn't believe the Constitution is good at defending personal freedoms of Americans. Listen to this.
On FISA, there are a couple of amendments that are being considered. One of them would require a warrant for every query of lawfully collected data. If that were to pass and get into the bill, would the president veto that bill?
So I'm not in a position to stand here today and make veto threats on behalf of the president. Those are decisions for him to make. What I will tell you is that we do not believe that that serves the national security interests of the United States. And in fact, today I will be making that case to a number of members that the warrant requirement as conceived is not the best way actually to ensure the protection of the personal privacy of Americans. There are a number of other elements of the bill that we have supported that would reform and update FISA to protect the civil liberties of Americans. But a warrant requirement from our perspective would go too far in undermining the very purpose of FISA, and frankly, it would put victims at risk.
Yeah, and while that is playing out, it would put victims at risk. You see how that is? Getting rid of FISA, warrantless searches of you and I would put victims at risk. And while that's playing out, with the intelligence community selling the idea very hard that the Constitution cannot protect you as well as an even bigger government can, well, one of the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy's deputies, one of his lieutenants, now the House Intel Committee chair, comes out right on cue with a brand new story about Russia and some new threat they pose. However, the satellite-based threat is not new, no matter what Mike Turner says, nor is it anything that we are overly concerned about from all I can find and read. This has been known for years. It's not even deployed yet. But while they're debating the future of the FISA courts, as you've heard, Republicans and Democrats, and the ability to avoid getting those pesky search warrants that are required to investigate Americans, they're also pushing hard to get $95 billion in funding for the corrupt government in Ukraine. It's all going on at the same time to keep fighting the evil Russians, you see. How many false flag Russian hoaxes are we supposed to swallow before we finally choke? Seemed to catch the National Security Advisor off guard Wednesday. That could all be for show, too. Jake Sullivan dodging the idea of a massive national security threat thrown out by Mike Turner, the House Intel Committee chair. Here's what he had to say.
Shortly before you came out, Congressman Mike Turner issued a statement saying that President Biden should declassify intelligence related to a, quote, serious national security threat. What can you say about the threat and what the administration plans to do?
So first, I reached out earlier this week to the Gang of Eight to offer myself up for a personal briefing to the Gang of Eight. And in fact, we scheduled a briefing for the 4 House members of the Gang of Eight tomorrow. That's been on the books. So I am a bit surprised that Congressman Turner came out publicly today in advance of a meeting on the books for me to go sit with him alongside our intelligence and defense professionals tomorrow. That's his choice to do that. All I can tell you is that I'm focused on going to see him, sit with him, as well as the other House members of the Gang of Eight tomorrow. And I'm not in a position to say anything further from this podium at this time.
So that's today, right? The Gang of Eight and this dog and pony show for national security happening today anyway. But in the middle of this debate, which, by the way, the vote on FISA has been postponed until further notice for other reasons. We'll get to that later. But in the middle of that debate about warrants and warrantless searches of Americans, Mike Turner throws this out on the table. Boom. The sad fact is this. We're left trusting no one. And maybe that's the entire goal here. Keep everyone questioning everything that happens and doubt every threat until we make a fatal error, missing a big one along the way. For my part, I was sure the new threat would be something connected to China. I mean, after all, there are only 3 existential threats to America that stand out to me. In no particular order, they are China, for all the obvious reasons. The border that's wide open and has had more Chinese nationals, men of military age, come across it at any time in our history. And, of course, our massive debt and stagnant economy that's now hopelessly entangled with the likes of the Chinese. And, yes, to a lesser extent, other countries, too. Now, do you see a pattern here? Because I certainly do. Nearly everything that is a credible and dangerous existential threat to America in 2024 is connected to China, either directly or indirectly or both. That is the common denominator. What I don't like and what I don't find on the list is Russia or Ukraine, but we keep seeing those inside the Beltway trying to sell us the snake oil, and they keep pushing the Russian hoax. This brings into full relief just how involved politicians are on both sides of the aisle to sell you this idea that by extension will also taint former President Trump in some way because of the first Russian hoax bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton beginning back in 2016. So, a Republican was running his own Russian hoax, a guy who was in Ukraine just days ago, by the way. This was on the War Room yesterday. Explains a lot. Listen.
I got a call from a bunch of Wall Street guys thinking it was China related when he first said it, and everybody was really surprised. This was Turner running his own Russia hoax. I mean, this guy's a fraud, right? So let's not forget that he's appointed by Leader McCarthy to be the Gang of Eight, right? The Gang of Eight's extremely important. I mean, you have the Gang of Eight sitting there being briefed, and we've got one member of the Gang of Eight, McConnell, we're talking about going through a tragedy in his family, and this guy decides to pull the fire alarm. I think it was DC Drano dug up the pictures of him in Kiev 4 days ago. My direct experience with this was when I was dealing with the House Intel team, and they were looking into what the real issue was, which was how China was buying Washington through the billionaire elite crowd, which is a very substantial issue that nobody's looking into now. And Nunes left, and there was a whole Russiagate team doing that. Turner got the job from McCarthy, and he perp walked out all the people doing the Russia hoax investigation. So this is a guy's no supporter of Trump. He's no supporter of MAGA.
No supporter of Trump. No supporter of MAGA. And he puts out this idea that somehow this space system that the Russians are developing, again, it's not even deployed, is somehow worthy of getting everybody stirred up in the middle of the FISA debate. How convenient and completely unbelievable. We're going to continue our deep dive into this, painfully honest, after the break here on the Steve Gruber Show.